Good afternoon. Hopefully there are some people watching on this. I think there are about 100 people registered. This is the third in a series of webinars we're doing. As I always say, I'm a face for radio, but hopefully we've got a bit of a message to deliver out there. We'll wait, if it's okay with everyone, just for another minute to see who does join us. And we have the webinar today, which is Nobody Goes Bankrupt for the Craic, which is me using our Irish influence, if you like, to explain what's going on. It's a phrase that's been used many times in terms of what we do, and we thought it might catch people's attention and hopefully drive them towards our webinar. But we'll just give it another minute if that's okay with everybody. Hope everybody's okay in the world today in these crazy times, which unfortunately will bring this subject more and more into play. So as I say, welcome. There's a few questions have been submitted. If there are any specific questions or queries or technicals or whatever, if we can't get it, we will go and find the advice. There's an email at the end, which is my direct email. There's a telephone number if you want to call us. Me and my team will give you the best response we can. If we can't find it, we'll go and find out for you. This isn't, yes, it is about business promotion. There's no two ways about that. But first and foremost, it's to try and share a bit of the subject matter, which I say will unfortunately develop as things unfold from the crisis. And we'll get started then. So what I've done it is by way, or I have, my team have prepared a bit of a PowerPoint here, which gives a bit of form to everything. We will be sending them around afterwards. And again, any queries, questions, and also if I'm technically wrong, I know we've got quite a few solicitors and barristers listening here. Do put me right, and if need be, I'll go back to the audience as it were to explain. Yeah, big and ugly enough, we're quite good on tactics, but if you're going to catch us on technical, we will relay that information. So, a little bit of an introduction. This is who we are. We are Bell & Company Debt Strategists. We know our way around the debt market. We're not insolvency practitioners by any stretch of the imagination. How dare you? But we deal with those types of debt, corporate, personal, established in Northern Ireland about 2010. Saw through that recession, still seeing quite a bit of that through actually the cases there we've been discussing today in Dublin and Belfast. That's ongoing. And then we have as our sister company, EU Property Solutions, which deals with the legacy and issues, if you like, for the last property crash in terms of what was undoubtedly mis-selling, but which has culminated in huge amounts of negative equity. We had a webinar last week and we were talking about the situation in Cyprus. So we're quite well versed in terms of property debt across the board. My name is Terry Bell. I'm the chairman of the company, and we've established a team here of 20 of us here and in Leeds. We used to have an office in Spain as well, but we now have a very strong legal presence. My background is accountancy, crap accountant, but I do know my way, I believe, around insolvency in the main. Technically, the legal guys and barristers can take me apart, but in terms of driving, developing a strategy, and very, very importantly, implementing that strategy, that's what we do, and that's our USP. A couple of basics, we all know these, but it's very important because this gives us our yin and yang in bankruptcy. So bankruptcy is there either to shake money out of people. By that we mean if they've got it and they don't want to part it, that's a good ploy in terms of bankruptcy, and or making sure you push people to the extreme to make sure they perform as best they can. Alternatively, and we're going to find this more and more, I think, bankruptcy brings the ability, as I say there, to protect yourself from creditors. That's going to be more and more apparent as this recession, whatever form it takes, depression, whatever they're saying, we see how that goes. But it's going to become more and more prevalent. And there's an example here of some advice we recently gave. Try not to offend. If I do, I'm sorry. Sometimes I dig out our legal friends. Sometimes I dig out insolvency practitioners. It's only because we're quite emotive in what we do, and it's how we roll. Definitely not deliberate. If I fall out with anybody, please lift the phone and tell me, and if it's right, I'll apologise. Just a little thing here, we're quite strong in our support for the NSPCC. They're going through a very difficult days. We're not charging, obviously, for any of this, but if you do feel minded to please make a small contribution to the NSPCC, that'd be great. 5 or 10 would be great. It's just very important to them at the minute. Difficult times for them, difficult times for all charities, but it's one that we hold fairly dear to our hearts. If you can help us, and them more importantly, that'd be great. By the way, it was Esther Ranson, because she's our mate, Esther Ranson's excuse me, 80th yesterday, and a little birthday present, £5 or £10, your money be very well received. So here's a list of contents. There's quite a bit to get through, and it's one of those, similar to what we did on personal guarantees quite recently. Once you get into the subject, there's a lot of it. It's how far you can and can't go. So I'm going to rattle through this so that we can just see how much we can cover. Now, when we're talking about a couple of things that are going on in the world today, in terms of where Rishi is, because he's Chancellor, bless him, and the economic backdrop as it was prior, it's to make sure we understand what could be coming forward further down the track and the type of the recession, because it's a very, very different place to, say, 2008 through 2010. So those are the issues that we're going to deal with. If there's anything else we've missed, please do tell us. And it nearly hangs together. It's quite tricky, trying to bring so much into one area. And these are our findings. This is how we deal with it. We get up to between 20 and 30 inquiries a week. So we're a fair weather vane, we think, for what's going on out there. So I won't run through each and one of them, the contents. We'll just crack on there. And first off, we're going to look at the economic backdrop prior to the outbreak of COVID-19. We were finding a situation where the economy, even with the very, very low interest rates, the economy was flatlining at best. Some businesses were doing well. Tech was good. Tech was very good. But a lot of the hospitality and retail were going wrong prior to COVID-19. The old institutional releases were taking their toll on diminishing industries, and it's not sustainable. We were starting to see more and more inquiries, and this slide's not quite right, and a lot of those are coming from the peer-to-peer lenders, something which we're going to expand on more. And as we say, here we're based in Belfast here, but I would suggest now up to 90% of our inquiries are coming from Great Britain. So it's a big market. It's very strange at the minute. It's still a bit quiet. Nobody knows which way this is going to go. Obviously, a lot of people are, to put it bluntly, hiding until it comes back. You know, they're going to have the rude awakening when they go back to work and have to open the door and find hundreds of letters behind it. So it's going to be a bit ugly, but we'll go through a bit of that. But we were heading that way. How quickly there's going to be a full-on correction, we don't know. But the much abused phrase, unprecedented, the world has never stopped like this. So that's the backdrop we went up to there. And then we've got Rishi's, I've called this Rishi's grant scheme, because let's call it for what it is here, right? You had companies as Luke Johnson, I looked at there, Luke Johnson, a great writer in the Sunday Times, businessman, say he was at the helm when Patisserie Valerie went up the left. He quite rightly went, as he started, he said, right, there are companies that are going to have, similar to the disease, pre-existing conditions, they're not going to last. Unfortunately, on the back of that as well, on top of that, you're going to get good men and women who are good business people who will be taken out here, because the speed of the recession, wherever it is on the scale, is very difficult to predict. So I've referred to Rishi's grant schemes there, and to my mind, obviously he's got to try and do something here. If as I say, the world seemed to stop in the middle of March, it's just started to come back. We've now been in our office for day 2, so that's cool. Getting the team back in graduated stretches, and what we've got here, obviously, is the furlough scheme to stop the mass redundancies. There's still, unfortunately, in my opinion, there's going to be huge redundancies, and that's going to be difficult. We'll slightly deal with that later. Then he's brought in civils and bibbles, and the underlying thing here, one thing that we knew what they're about. It was too easy. I know people I would give £50 to, and there was a man the other day, he got 50,000, and he's in a failed IVA, but the bank fired out the 50,000. The FT in a recent survey found that the key word in here is to listen to it's very important to listen to the full phrase here. 43% of those who have taken bounce back loans don't intend to pay it. Not they don't think they could, they're not sure how it will go. They don't intend to pay it. There's no PGs. The banks are going to have to do their best to recover this. I think ultimately, way down the track, there'll be a huge bad bank taking all of this in. And similar to, obviously, the Corona business interruption loans, bigger amounts, pretty sure that's where all that's going to head. At the minute, though, it's staging out a recession. Furlough, hold on to as many jobs as we can till we get the economy going back, look to get the schools back so that teachers can fully engage, and all the other changes that are going to happen to the economy. Civils and bibbles, 18 months down the track, when Bibbles 12 months in, they're going to start repaying. It's not going to happen, and then you're going to get a similar effect with the corona business interruption loans. This is all in the backdrop that nobody knows how deep this recession is. We're hearing about V's, U's, extended L's. It's not going to be good, but I think that's going to be mainly on the back of a lot of redundancies here. Unfortunately, there's a lot. The economy and the type of structure it had in terms of the gig workers has left a lot of people exposed here. It maybe lulled us into a false sense of security of where the economy really was. You get the soothsayers are saying it's depression. I don't think it'll go that way, because the government has that brilliant ability at the minute, with the interest rates as close to zero as they could ever be, can put the photocopy on and print the money like crazy. So that's our backdrop. It's actually slowed it down for us, because the ability to Sibbles and Bibbles is, as Luke Johnson said, it's keeping the guys who've got the pre-existing condition, not to be too dramatic about it, on financial and business life support machines. So it's a strange one, but we see how it pans out. So if Rishi's upset, then I've called it a grant scheme. Sorry, Rishi, that's what it is. So our principal markets are Northern Ireland and GB, and then we also do some work when approached by the UK, by those in the Republic. Now, in terms of our immediate market, our geographic market, if you like, NI is relatively stable in terms of property value. We all know what happened, particularly in Ireland, in terms of the last crash, and that was catastrophic in every sense. So I think that's relatively stable. Unfortunately, I think the major effect here and in the UK is going to be the level of redundancies after furlough. As soon as businesses start being asked to put 40% of their, or start contributing to the furlough scheme, it's going to get a bit ugly. You're starting to see major organisations already start doing the redundancy work in terms of sitting down, negotiating with unions and other organisations. In terms of types of business being hit, nothing is sacrosanct. There was an interview the other night on LBC with Willie Walsh, and Willie Walsh was explaining, Len McCuskey, the union man, was saying that you've got 1.6 billion pounds in your last balance sheet, so you can afford this. You should be taking furlough money. Willie Walsh replied that it was costing them 20 million a day just to be on the ground. That's 600 million pound a year. 3 months of that, 600 million pounds a month, 3 months of that takes out the cash reserves. So nobody could see the effect it's going to have across it. Some businesses strangely flourished. There's a couple of guys we know doing brilliantly well. One who deals in supplying ships, and he's doing tremendously well. And you just don't, it still comes down to the sort of individual you know. We know hospitality is going to be devastated. There's no two ways about it. I'm not, personally, I don't mind a beer, but I'm not rushing to a pub if I've got to give them the details, going for an hour and a half, drink a plastic pint and stand 2 meters from the bar. I'm not going to go to a restaurant that's going to be where I'm going to be served by somebody wearing a mask and gloves. And I speak to a restaurateur there in Harrogate, and he was saying that he can't run his business on 40% level of business. It just doesn't work. You know, you've got the lease wrapped around, you've got the equipment, you've got the whole setup, and suddenly you're asked to work at about 40%. Not going to work. This is now, with COVID-19, these businesses were struggling prior. Retail, they just shot to pieces. And I think since I've come back to Belfast, I think the best thing is that I've managed to detox off Amazon. It was almost like Pavlov's dogs. The buzzer went, oh, there's Amazon. Too easy, taking out the whole retail market. People struggling with huge FRI leases just aren't going to exist. And so it's a usual suspects, but nine every time. I actually allude to, I know it's a few of our legal friends here. We know of legal practices, and no, it's not one or two. Plenty of legal practices are struggling. The courts are closed. How do you litigate? How can you justify going to the client to get fees? So it's anyone and everybody is being hit here. And then, as I say, I think one of the major things, obviously, the failure of the business and/or bankruptcy, but the subject matter is about here, is the demographic, the redundancies. We know it's going to be the younger end of the scale, and it's going to be the older end of the scale here. And it's not going to be nice. We're actually looking at a product at the minute where we look at consumer debt. We've done a bit of research, which I'll relay to you in a while, because it gives the backdrop and attitudes to things and people's exposure. I don't know why we've got a map of the world on the PowerPoint there, but we're talking about Great Britain here in terms of, I believe, it's going to get a rude awakening here. again, back to our local market here where we're established, the NI, pretty established, pretty well set, and been through a lot, so they're nearly used to it. Great Britain has had a sort of fairly meteoric rise. There's a couple of figures here, just in house prices. It's crazy over there. Somebody can live in a £2 million house in London, but not have enough to pay, say, for instance, our fees or offer anything in respect. And those are the things that are going to be under some attack here. Not going to get creditors their money, and we're going to come to that in a minute in terms of tactics and everything else. But I really believe that Great Britain's heading for like I say, a rude awakening. So difficult days, the rude awakening again. So these are two stats that we secured this week. In terms of the whole of Great Britain, property prices have gone up 33% since 2010. So your £100,000, sorry, your £200,000 house now is 267. And then you look at London, and the meteoric rise there since then was 74%. So many asset-rich people, and its equity in houses is usually looked at creditors as the soft target. And again, I repeat it because sometimes sorry, legal friends again, we don't always get that. Realising the cash out of property is not that easy. Statutory demands are flying around despite the government's attempts to slow that down in Britain. Here in Northern Ireland, we've gone through phases where they do loan sales, or they get to do a loan sale, and there's a wave of statutory demands. Now they're starting to come out in England, and even though the government have held that back in terms of property issues, is the main thing, that's coming. Yeah, so that's unfortunately coming. They can't do that forever because we're almost like creating lawless monsters with it if everybody keeps getting away with things. Another man I know there, he has 42 properties and only got paid the rent on 3 of them in full for the last quarter. So we've got to be careful what we create and what we wish for. So GB, a real rude awakening, repeat myself, but that's where we're going. We also want to just quickly, while we're here, look at IVAs because particularly prevalent and will become more and more so. But it's also to know the backdrop here because this is a huge market. Let's cut to the chase here. The number of large IVA houses, we'll call them, is mind-boggling. IVAs, just again, some people may know, some don't, came about from the 1986 recession, and it was Margaret Thatcher's attempt to stop businessmen and women at that time going bankrupt. That's been overtaken by these IVA houses, and they drive it purely for consumer debt. If you Google bankruptcy, you'll not find anything about bankruptcy for most likely 6 pages, as all the IVA companies come up, and they're looking to encourage people with debts as low as 5,000 or 6,000 to go in IVAs, which is not great. IVAs, like I say, 78,000 last year were registered, and the year before that was 71,000. So that's only going to go one way. Quality advice, question mark, that could have had a whole lot of question marks. There is some advice. I'm not saying we don't give the right advice, insolvency practitioners don't give the right advice, but it's more a selling thing. I filled a form in just to test what happens. I would have been contacted 25 times minimum to see if I was still thinking about an IVA. It's pretty high pressure sales stuff. They're great fee earners for these guys, and they really are. The advice nearly goes. The advice nearly goes. If you don't fit their model, you may not come in. The other one that they're missing, and they're not directing because they're not giving the right advice, is the potentiality of anybody. In simple terms, anybody with debt under 20,000 can apply for a debt relief order, and a simple enough process. People are getting tired. We've got a 73-year-old lady there, bless her, who got caught for about £7,000 worth of rates. Wasn't clever, but that's where she was, and somebody missold her an IVA. It's pretty disgraceful. Anyway, we managed to extricate her in the end and got her into a DRO, which we didn't charge for. Then you get within the IVA field, you get a company, the biggest supplier of IVAs, if you like, is Craic. Fine organisation, do their stuff, but purely processing consumer debt. And we're going to come on to it a bit later, and it's the last point in this slide. The IVA returns for creditors are not great. They're not great. And it's the time span involved there. But Craic, some organisation, at the moment, I believe they've got 85,000 live IVAs. And there was a wee furore the other day in terms of, I'm new to Twitter, there was a Twitter storm as Craic decided to charge every IVA £85 plus VAT to COVID-19 assess the cases. £85 times 85,000 IVAs is 6.5 million ka-ching, right? So, but that's the power these guys now have, and as we go on here, they're going to fill the boots. Credit fix, not slighting. We've met them a couple of times, spoken to them a couple of times. They're a good organisation, but not sure always that IVAs are the be all and end all. In fact, I'm anti-IVAs, unless, to my mind, unless you're a director, you definitely can't go bankrupt, or the revenue will exceed, which we'll come to in a minute, to an IVA. That's the only instance I see that, and that's the product we're developing in terms of consumer debt. Huge increase in consumer debt while people try and survive here. Huge debt, huge levels of debt are going to accrue. So in terms of our research that we've done in this field, it's the attitude to debt as well. So there was a guy that helps us with a bit of marketing, and he did a bit of research behind this. And he created two, there's a spectrum of models. There's TikTok Tina, and there's the nuclear family. TikTok Tina watches every reality show going. She watches Love Island, and then buys clothes on Klarna, where you can buy whatever the stars, or whatever they're called, on Love Island are. They wear a certain type of clothes. You can buy that top, jeans, whatever it is, 50, 60, 100 quid, but you can put that in immediate finance. TikTok Tina doesn't really give a monkeys. She's spending like crazy, and she may go to an IVA or wherever she is. Other end of the spectrum is the nuclear family. Mum and dad work hard, 2 jobs, we'll call them, say, above the minimum wage, say living wage and a bit, and they have 2 kids. Unfortunately, when things start to go in there, when one of their parents lose their job, that's a massive change, and that's where debt issues are going to arise again there. So that's our spectrum. That's what we're working on. We're still creating a model that suits that, but it's the volume of debt's going to be huge. Credit's been far too easy across the world, up to the mega levels, even with Rishi going around writing billions of loans, through to TikTok Tina taking a pair of jeans on 100 quid. Just too easy. It's come to the end, and now it's going to get ugly. Last point on IVAs, we did a bit of work on this as well, and research, spoke to a few creditors, and their typical return net after costs, etc., is typically between 8 and 11%, even though they may have been promised 20, 25, 30, whatever in an IVA. Come the end of it, it's typically between 8 and 11%, and the first dividend, the earliest first dividend, is year 3. Come to year 5, when you get your check for 100 quid, you've got no idea what it's for. So IVAs, not a fan of, but they're the backdrop, and they're important that they're obviously discussed when we're looking at bankruptcy here. Litigation and statutory demands. Okay, so now I was going to take this top line out, but I'm leaving it in there, and definitely no offense meant. Okay, I'm sure the legal brethren that are watching us here will understand this isn't aimed at them, but what I'm concerned about, particularly in Great Britain, is that the legal profession is struggling. There's no 2 ways about it. Okay, because it's a fee-led business. There is no cash flow in the world, and like I say, courts here, for instance, Northern Ireland, as far as I understand, are more suspended till September. Then there's going to be the massive backlog. In the UK, you've got the massive backlog, which we'll come back to in a minute. What I don't want to do is hopefully we still keep it on the basis that let's not get angry about this. Okay, it'd be quite easy to say, right, here's a case, I'm going to nail it, I'm going to get the fee, and I'm going to blow it. And it doesn't actually win. It's the wrong attitude. It's making sure that all of us work for a solution here, which is easy to say, but it's what actually achieves results at the end of the day. Obviously, there are cash flow requirements for this, but I know some solicitors in England who are angry, and they're going to go around basically putting lights out to try and show the old guns, and this is what we can do to people. We will achieve, I don't know if you think it'll achieve the best result. I know in one case it's madness, but that's the way it goes. The statutory demands are starting to flow. The busiest people that are going to be are those that serve statutory demands. It's as most of us know, it's what rattles the cage first. It's a precursor to bankruptcy. It's a serious thing. It's served. A man or a woman comes up your drive, not this time of year, but in the darkness, knocks on your door and serves you something that says, ultimately, if we don't sort this out, you're going to be bankrupted. And it brings people to the table, or it should do. Those that ignore it, that's their own fault. But I think in the UK, particularly when I think there's going to be a period where everybody's going to be fairly Melancholy, we're all well, okay, we're linked together, but as soon as the courts get back open in earnest, then I think it's going to be pretty ugly out there. Just a little bit on our experience in terms of the court system, GB versus NI, and to a degree ROI. NI is a pretty efficient service. They work with mainly solicitors either issuing writs or default notices, default cases. In Great Britain, it's brutal. Dates are absolutely cast in stone. If you miss one, if you don't adhere to the system, which in the main is now systems led, people get judgments, and then you've got the issues that go from there. Going hand in hand in that is the comment that the courts are wrapped. At the moment, we have a client, they took his eye off the ball, he turned up to us, I'm all cool, I've got this covered, and then he got a judgment, so he has got a case to answer, he has got a defence here. He's trying to issue an N244 there in England, in Northampton, and it's going to take them 23 days to take his fee because of the backlog of stuff that's coming through. The same here in Northern Ireland. Again, I'll be led. I know there's a couple of barristers here. You'll be frustrated as hell. And it's then what's the timescale going to be out the other side? So courts are going to block here, and again, it goes back to that sort of trying to get, which I didn't maybe get it across clearly. Is let's all stay calm. We start getting angry, we're not going to achieve the best solution for the clients, yours and ours. It's ours. So we're trying to do our best, but you get the best return for your clients and the right advice. Another thing that's becoming more and more prevalent in terms of some of the quality of the stat demands we're finding issued in England, a lot of, we're going to come to it in a minute, in terms of the peer-to-peer, is nearly all of them rely on PGs, personal guarantees. And the quality of the security is poor. So we have a particular battle at any time with builders merchants. And typically a personal guarantee would have been signed whilst they were signing up for the account with the salesman. And some of the stuff that's going on there isn't good. And it's stating the obvious and a bit patronizing this, right? Make sure if you've got a PG, that you check the quality of that PG, both sides, be it the creditor or the debtor. It's an element of security. Is it right or is it wrong? There may be some grey areas, but essentially that's what you're against. And we're finding the quality of some of the PGs is pretty bad. There's a lot of dodgy signatures going on, which we stay away from. We're not interested in those sort of cases. And we have to be very careful there with the PGs. Again, it's making sure the case is as strong as it can be before it comes down the track. Commerciality, back to our legal friends, not picking on you, this goes across the board, okay, is keeping the commerciality involved here. So we find a number of instances where there's a particular case we've got at the minute, and what they're not going to do to our client isn't true. They're going to bury them, they're going to bankrupt them, they're going to do this, they're going to do that, and they don't understand what is actually going on here. So the commerciality of the decision process, right? Of course, everyone's got to take a strong position. It's not a rollover carry on here, but it's very important that everybody understands their commercial returns on action here. We were earlier today, we deal with Spanish property debt, and we were on with the delinquent debt director. We call him 3D in Madrid there, and they are beside themselves what to do in terms of the cases where people have just flown home and left the properties. And we're saying, well, if we engage with them, we can maybe get them to the table. That's part of our conciliatory, almost like negotiating stance we take. But they didn't know what they want. At the end of the day, you may be owed. Another one today was there's a man with a huge debt, personal guarantee, they got a couple of million, and they're talking about the quantum of the debt, the return. It's not commercial. You're not going to get 2 million quid. Get over yourself. Let's start talking about what people have. And I think not teaching anybody to suck eggs there, but you've always got to know what you're trying to get here. We've had litigation cases where they're going to the nth degree and there's nothing left. So it's very, very important that. The other one is, yes, there is, like I said there, bankruptcy is there to shake the tree, shake people, shake money out of people. But be careful what you wish for. We all know that if a case ends up with a trustee, you may be after your 100, 200, £1 million, whatever it is. If you follow this through to the nth, sure, you've got to put the arm up the back of the stat demand and or the petition, but as soon as it's gone bankrupt, then you lose complete carriage of the case, obviously. The trustee takes over, he's going to be on it for 3 years, something which I'm going to mention in a minute. But it's keeping the carriage of the case. And another flip side on that carriage of the case is we're finding, again, especially in England, with solicitors who take carriage of the case and lose this completely. And almost like, I'm sure there are instances where they don't actually understand what they're trying to achieve at the end of the day, but the clock is running. Harsh, but we're coming across it more and more. Usually, I think there are only 2 or 3 instances where you've got here commerciality versus teacher lesson. So commerciality, as long as you can get over your substantiated thing, if someone's taking action against you and are after you, but you can quantify and validate your offer, i.e. with valuations and everything else, it's very important to get that up early so that you can justify and quantify your offer and bid to conclude. Some people can't be talked to. One, typically, I mentioned earlier, builders merchants, they seem very, very aggressive. And it's almost like, it'd be a weakness if they let a builder off. And they're very difficult. If somebody tells me different, I love to hear it, because they're brutal. And yeah, sure, you've got to have your legal process, but we see them teach people a lesson, which isn't right and appropriate. But it didn't get them any money. The other ones are on commerciality versus teacher lesson are Mr. HMRC. Again, they're not going to bend on amount owed. They may consider an IVA, but commerciality isn't considered. I've had many arguments with Worthing there, the insolvency section, in terms of making sure you get the best recovery for the Chancellor versus their argument. This person hasn't conducted their tax affairs right, so we're teaching a lesson, basically. They don't say it in those words, but that's the lesson. If you don't comply in terms of the tax process, which is, again, fair enough, but the commerciality goes. We're bringing a little bit of the civil service mentality. If it doesn't fit that box, it ain't going to happen. So that's commerciality should always win in mine, especially in debt negotiation. Sure, do what you're going to do and try and rake it out, right? Then, if it is followed through to its conclusion, because again, wherever the carriage of the case was, be it fee-driven or other agendas, whatever, again, the carriage passes to the trustee. Property involved, potentiality of 3 years. The costs are huge. We're dealing with a case there in London where a man has a house worth 900,000, and the projection on it is that if the client complies right the way through this, the cost should only be 90,000. I politely inquired as to where he got that figure, and it was one of the big boys. And yeah, we all got to make a buck, but that's crazy. And again, sure, bankruptcy is there to be used, but make sure we're all aware. And this works both sides. This works for professionals, and it works for those on professionals who are chasing debt, and it works against the people being chased for debt. So it's knowing where we sit here. The ability of relevant parties to value assets, okay, especially companies. So assets with reason property you can do, again now as things develop in terms of the platforms, the right moves, the Zooplas, the whatever channel you want to use, pretty accurate in what they do there, because that's not far off. But other assets then become harder to value, especially companies we're finding. So, but in its understanding, again, if we take somebody to bankruptcy, to all intents and purposes, we're going to end up liquidating that company. We may perceive it to be worth £1 million, but after it's been taken apart and everything else, if there's anything left, I'll be surprised. If there's stock, if there's cash in there, that's not going to be there. If it's held up by a lump of intangible, it's no use, just by the very name. So the ability to value all assets and take that overall perspective and seeing what your requirement is, dear creditor, in terms of cash, needs to be carefully considered. We don't always find that come through. As I said earlier, I think we're still in a little bit of a Spanish solicitor once gave me an analogy of where we were in a recession there, and they said, when you have a dream and you fall and you don't scream, we're still in that stage there. As soon as this little bit gets over, unfortunately, I see a brutal 18 months in terms of what's going to happen in the bankruptcy world. This is something that's becoming particularly prevalent now, and a bit of a bugbear of mine are peer-to-peer loans and the PGs that involve there. And then, as I called this little slide, the toxic fintech mix that exists, and there's a lot of it. Now, peer-to-peer filled a brilliant gap after the 2008-2010 crash. as the high street banks just basically didn't lend out unless it was copper bottom, secured to the nth and everything else. So peer-to-peer did fill a role. Unfortunately, I've got into trouble for saying this before, and I was on an interview the other day with peer-to-peer finance and spent the whole interview biting my lip. I'd suggest some of their due diligence is not very good. We were with an eminent insolvency practitioner in Bristol a couple of months ago, and he was showing me some of the stuff. He does a bit of work for the peer-to-peer group, which is having it off the record. And you've got industrial units giving us addresses, and it basically, peer-to-peer groups, in the main, it's not their money. They're a brokerage. The fees are there. They've got to be on. The money's got to go out the door, and the FCA needs to have a good look at themselves. There, Mr. Bailey, who now claimed yesterday he saved the government, was running the ship there at the FCA, and debacle doesn't cover it. But that's the backdrop. The PG is still used as the principal security. Again, the level of due diligence isn't great. I remember being involved in a couple of conversations with brokers and the peer-to-peer underwriting teams, and it was almost like they were trying to sell it more than the sales guys. So it's, but the PG, our experiences so far with peer-to-peers is they're very quick to press the litigation button. They're very, very quick to pay £10,000 to put a £150,000 PG claim into county court and try and push it through there. Again, it doesn't necessarily get their money, but there's a lot of intransigence. I think there's a bit of fear as well, but it's difficult. You have so many different types of peer-to-peer lending as well. You've got tax, you've got R&D, you've got VAT on property purchases, you've got the conventional funding for working capital. Any number. You've got a couple of them are going now into the civils loans. I saw yesterday thin cats, but each and every one has a different approach to it in terms of the debt recovery. This as well, I think, has manifested itself and made itself particularly difficult in that they didn't envisage problems with their debts. Naive, but it's a bit like going on. Someone once said it's a bit like going on a first date and discussing divorce. You don't do it, but now it's coming home to roost. And what we're finding is, because there was this absolute sea of money out there, you can quickly, or businesses that are struggling could quickly get money. I was with somebody who had 10 loans, and whilst we were there, he was offered another 25,000 on the phone. No due diligence, no nothing. He just got it offered there, and then he just had to press the button, and he was accredited. Literally, it was crazy. So an example here is we've got a client here who has 7 peer-to-peer loans. One of them has issued a stat demand. Whether they follow that through, we don't know. County court summons has been issued, and the man is struggling in terms of finance, but also in between the years. And there are 7 differing approaches. I'll go to that point above here, and we can't guess them all. We could sort out 6 of them, but the 7th one could say, no, we've had enough, we're going to bankrupt you. He was struggling with essays mentally, and so he had, I think it was about 150,000. He had an equity of about a couple of 100,000, and his one issue is now he's got to deal with a trustee. We suggested, because of where he was, he couldn't deal with it and get through it, and he couldn't deal with the unknown. We've opted for bankruptcy. We've just got the one issue. We're negotiating the equity in the house. There will be a COVID correction on that price now on the house for sure. They're talking typically about 10% in the southeast of England, and it's how then we carry that through from there. Different ballgame altogether. Trying to deal with 7 aggressive creditors is not good, and definitely not good for the client. Returns in bankruptcies and IVAs. Real general one. I apologise that this is quite a general webinar, but there's so much involved here. Quite sadly, I get excited by this, and there's so many things that you can go at here. Each and every case in bankruptcy, no matter what it is different. Be it a farmer, be it a shop owner with a big lease, whatever it may be. But you still go back to the basic premise of what they have and don't have. We all know that. Okay. You also are reliant then on the trustee when he's appointed, and that insolvency practitioner, their IPs are a different type of animal. And I make no excuse for not putting inverted commas around that. IPs have different agendas in every sense, and quite rightly so. So they have to obviously do the very best for the creditors. They also have to make a profit. I get that. But they also have a massively changed market now, and cash is going to be the 8th wonder of the world. Any opportunity now, we work quite extensively with a loan broker in the south of England there. They will be doing no adverse credit lending. They will be doing no lending in its normal form if your income doesn't meet criteria, the usual criteria. They will look at short-term bridges because it ties it to the asset. Another point on top of that is that we had a case there where a man had a farm worth about 350,000. The trustee decided that it was worth 450. We were proved right, but he put his costs up by 40,000 because we had the temerity to question the valuation, which we were right on. At some point, there's got to be, as I say, there's some scrutiny of costs here. The ability for people to actually formally complain about the level of costs is pretty poor. 100%. If the client's not compliant, I had a thing in here. There was a thing, and I took it out. Clients are idiots, which is not the best marketing thing in the world. But I took it out of the thing. But the costs will exacerbate the more intransigent and the less helpful a client is. But that was, we call it taking the Michael, is the polite phrase. 40 grand for having the temerity to knock a valuation down by 100 grand was, and we'll have to take that one way or another, have to take it further. We're not looking for punch ups. We will do things that are right for our clients and right generally. So there's a point I raised earlier in terms of IVAs, and there's a point I'll come to in a minute, which revolves around slightly the security involved in some of these IVAs. Typical returns are at that level. And again, the flow of the funds out of that arrangement can take 3 to 5 years. For the creditor, to my mind, it's madness to even agree, but it's fairly tied up in terms of the platforms that you use to take the votes. And it's a slick machine, but it's not getting. We don't do a lot, but we deal with a few, and it's something we're looking to develop where we deal with credit cards for clients. We will get definitely a shorter return, a shorter period in getting paid. We're typically talking 12 to 24 months, and usually more than 11%, that's for sure. So that's the sort of thing that's coming back. Two things on IVAs that are very prevalent now, and we're finding, are the ability for an insolvency practitioner to get an arrangement and get it voted through, but take a form of charge on the property, be it a restriction, a charge, whatever. So this is one of my bugbears with the IVAs. Why would you securitize your debt effectively? And trying to get IPs to turn that around is, they know they've got you. They've got the ultimate lever. There's ruder phrases than that, but they've really got you. And it's sometimes we talk to client, you will securitize that debt. Okay, if they want to go to court, get a judgment, apply for a charging order, etc., that's totally up to the creditor. But to offer it is madness, none of which is explained, which goes back to what I said about advice. Also, a lot of IVAs in the last 4 or 5 years are talking about payments along the way, say for 4 or 5 years, and then absolutely no chance now, absolutely no chance. So you're going to get IVAs where they're going to extend them at least 2 years, possibly more. And I might have a bit of a downer on IVAs, but I'd suggest that's only in the best interests of certain parties. Equity release, it's adverse credit, the fact you're in an IVA and the fact that you're not going to be able to prove it and get there. So we people looking for that type of finance, but there's no chance at this moment in time. Unless anybody knows differently, please do send me an email. A couple of other bits, just questions and answer. I'm mindful I've gone on a wee bit there, and it's a very general one, and it's just our view of where we are. These are a couple of questions I'll get, and I'll give you our backdrop and the sort of stuff that we've gone back to these clients on. So question one was somebody owing £37,500 on credit cards and a loan. It didn't have any assets. They rented their homes, and they've gone to Google, clicked on the first ad, and somebody's trying to flog, the Del Boy style, flog them an IVA, and told them they must avoid bankruptcy and scare the 7 types of bejesus out of them. There's 101 reasons why you should go into an IVA, not go bankrupt. Car's worth, they got a jalopy car, 3 grand, it's cool. But the concern was the loan was with their clearing bank. So that's okay, right? So the downsides of bankruptcy were asked. Okay, downsides are where your credit rating's gone anyway, and everything on your credit rating, be it bankruptcy, IVA, or any defaults, sit on there for 6 years. That's gone. You're bankrupt for a year. You can't win the lottery. You can't, you can't come into money basically, and you can't get any credit. You shouldn't get any more anyway if you manage to accumulate that sort of debt. In terms of downsides, assets, any other assets, we confirm, we do our due diligence. There are no other assets around. The under the, or round about the, 2 or 3 banks, if you're totally truthful, if you walk in and say, right, unfortunately I go bankrupt, I need a new current account, give them the simplest account, come with a debit card, and that's the downside. They were looking to tie this man in for 5 years, and I think he would have ended up paying nearly 50–60% of the money back before their costs came off. So why wouldn't you go bankrupt? The next one is something I alluded to earlier. The revenue after a lady here for 160,000, and she's been bidding. Sorry, other way around, husband, and he's been bidding at the revenue. Does 2 things, right? It wasn't substantiated, and it puts them off. They're not overly impressed across the board with it, and they won't accept any offer unless he pays £160,000. He's now got to a stage where he's exhausted his approach. They've had enough of it, and they're saying that they can start proceedings. They take a little while, the revenue typically, but they just keep coming. They have a couple of £100,000 of equity, which was pre-COVID-19, so that would have dropped a bit. They're saying IVA or bankruptcy. And again, it goes back to how compliant they were and how well they ran their tax affairs or otherwise. If they didn't run them very well, if there's 5 or 6 years there, and a year's PAY and loads of VAT outstanding, and or returns aren't filed, not a prayer. You can get an insolvency practitioner, get in there and discuss them, and or we do, but typically if you're non-compliant, it's just ticking the box. Commerciality goes out the window. So if, say, we offered out of that equity our 100,000, as was the figure I quoted there, and they didn't take it, that's obviously by the time they've gone through bankruptcy, we would have negotiated with the trustee down on the 100,000. They would have taken their fees. There would have been other costs, recoverable VAT, ad valorem tax, etc., etc. If they get 30–40 grand out of it, has ignored a personal guarantee claim, and now they've issued a bankruptcy petition. He's got some assets around him, 350,000, and he was asking, is it too late? Is it too late? I think most of us know in the professional world, everything's negotiable as long as it's sensible, and we always use the phrase, as long as you can turn their head. Turning their head means if you got there right, I'll give you, it's the old one, you get some guys going, I'll give you 10 grand. No, go away, don't show intelligence, we're bankrupt, we'll take our chances. So it's very important to keep that right spirit throughout. So that was a whistle-stop tour, but we're through it. I understand we've had sound problems, late call, but hey, I apologize for that. We're going to send out this if you want. We're going to send it out anyway. If you can't sleep tonight and you want something to read, do have a look at it. And if you would, please touch base on the Just Giving page there for NSPCC. The last point on there is that, I'm trying to get our contact details up, but they won't come up. No, frozen there. Our contact details, if you want, there's our website on the left there. My email address is trb@belcomp.co.uk. And if you want us, we're here. Hopefully it was of some use to you. I say, if I offended everybody, it wasn't. I seem to be having a dig at the legal boys. I know some of the people are listening to this, and hopefully they know that I wasn't being like that. But it's the issues we're coming across. So I thought we'd report that. Hopefully it's some use to you. And that's it. Stay safe. Have a good day. Cheers. Bye.